Наша позиция хорошо известна. Любые иностранные контингенты на Украине будут рассматриваться как законные
Our
цели
position is
вооруженных
well
сил
known.
Российской Федерации.
Any foreign contingent in Ukraine will be seen as a legal target for the Russian armed forces. And let the British government not deceive its subjects and not call those who it directs to the territory of Ukraine some advisors, some instructors who allegedly have nothing to do with the state of Great Britain. And now, again, the question arises, what will happen to the elections in Ukraine? Look, the U.S. President Trump said, the Politico newspaper said on December 8th that the Kiev regime, by the way, is using the war in order not to hold elections. Well, this is an obvious recognition. Here, look, another quote. I think that now is the time to hold them. The Ukrainian people should have such a choice. They have been talking about democracy for a long time, but this is no longer democracy. Again, Trump said. On December 10th, Zelensky said in response to Trump about the readiness for the elections. But on the condition, can you imagine? Zelensky obviously wants to stay in power. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, no one has any doubts that he has no chance to re-elect legally. It is clear what Zelensky wants from the West: to hold elections not in the common human understanding. He does not need elections in Ukraine. He needs to choose himself. As the age of appeal decreases, more and more young people are fleeing from Ukraine. And, in a human way, said the Minister of Internal Affairs of Luxembourg, I can understand this. However, there is a feeling of some kind of strangeness, because on the one hand, we, said the representative of Luxembourg, send weapons and money to Ukraine so that it can defend itself. And on the other hand, people are fleeing from there. It is necessary to decide either one or the other, and so that both will not work. End of quote. That is, already gradually, not at the same speed, but it begins to come to the point that those weapons and money that they supply to the Kiev regime do not reach the destination. And those people whom Zelensky seems to cover when he demands money and weapons from the West do not want to fight, and that the only way to combine the received weapons with these very people is to forcibly mobilize them in Ukraine. That is, someone in the West, about this scheme, begins to carefully, not to guess, but to try to speak up. They do not fight, you know. It is still unclear whether this statement is the so-called preparation of public opinion for the overthrow of aid to Ukraine or the cancellation of the status of temporary protection for men of the appeal age. However, it is obvious that 6 months ago, it was unthinkable to hear anything like this from the members of the government of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. The most absurd topic in the statement of the Kiev regime is the story of allegedly kidnapped, as they say, Russian and Ukrainian children. The representatives of the Kiev junta, including Zelensky's wife, Yelena, on all international platforms, promote the topic of allegedly kidnapped Ukrainian children. They describe the suffering of these children, how they are allegedly in occupation, how they are deprived of their own identity. My God, who deprives them? How? How? In fact, the main enemy of Ukrainians of all ages, including minors, is, of course, the anti-national regime of Zelensky, and in fact, he himself, personally, together with his wife. Look, the ruling class, teachers, educators, bloggers, so-called linguistic activists, impunishably poison and insult Russian-speaking children, calling them, again, I took this from their slogans, calling them wrong and demanding some kind of correction. This, of course, is a reference to Nazism of the 1930s and 1940s that this is not a change of linguistic identity by force. It is. Armenia remains a full-fledged member of the CSTO, which preserves all relevant rights and obligations. There are absolutely no obstacles to the resumption of active, normal, full-fledged work of partners in the organization. We hope that the White House will still be able to refrain from further crawling to a full-scale conflict that threatens to turn unpredictable consequences for the entire Western Hemisphere. We see how Russophobes in Western European countries, primarily under the leadership of the EU and the European Commission, fiercely resist any diplomatic initiatives that could bring the world closer, taking into account the interests of Russia. They continue to lie cynically, lie to their own citizens, that the war against our country, which has been unleashed by them, is some kind of economically profitable enterprise that will cost nothing to Europeans. It is already supposedly bearing fruit. Yes, it has already brought fruits to Europeans in the West. The truth is that the fruits are rotten. The crisis around Ukraine not only buried the model of European security, but also became evidence that the manipulation of Western concepts of European security, the mechanisms that were created to support it, led to the global destruction of all the developments that should have ensured this very security. This is a slightly different connection. It is not that the situation in Ukraine has ended or blown up or buried something. It has become an indicator, a signal light, a barometer that shows the situation.